In this How-To-Svelte, we're going to build a timeline. And if we go over to W3 Schools, their How-To section, and just look up timeline, you can see they have got a sample here. And so we'll take this initial project, which I think is just HTML and CSS, but we'll add obviously some JavaScript to it since it's a Svelte project. And we'll turn it into something that looks like this. So it's pretty much what they have. We'll start with our own array of objects, and each object representing a historical event with the title of the event and the date. And we'll pipe that to the DOM so it looks like this. And then after we get that working, what we'll do is we'll tap into someone else's database. So this is us providing a database, but we'll also tap into an API. Now, I couldn't find any convincing historical APIs, so I went ahead and just settled on this holiday API, which will serve the purpose. And this is holidayAPI.com. And it's a free API to sign up for, and they'll provide us, once you sign up, they'll provide you with a key, and we'll use that key to flesh out the endpoint, which will tap into the API. But it's the same idea. So we'll tap into their API and use that data to then go ahead and populate our timeline. And then after we do that, we'll go ahead and also add a search field so that we can get to certain parts of the timeline more efficiently. So for example, if I wanted to look up St. Patrick's Day using this holiday API, and then it scrolls right to St. Patrick's Day. Or let's say I wanted to look at all the holidays in April, so I could just type April, and it goes to there, and then we can just look at the holidays in April. So that will be the project. Let's go ahead and go back to W3 Schools, and we'll copy the HTML and CSS and paste it into our blank Svelte REPL. Okay, so one of the warning signs that the Svelte REPL shows us is the CSS selector body is unused. And so what we're going to do is we're going to wrap our timeline here in some main tags. And we'll replace body with main instead in the CSS rule. Next thing we'll do is we'll separate the HTML so we can see what's what. So the outer container is the timeline. And then inside we have two symmetrical elements here with a class of container. So each of this represents an event. So because they're symmetrical, let's go ahead and break this into a component that we'll call event. And next I'll bring over the CSS for container, content, and anything that says left or right. Then let's take the event component and import it into app. Now we have a lot of warnings here about CSS classes that are unused. That's all right, we'll resolve those soon enough. The next thing we'll deal with are the props. So let's head over to the event component, and let's create props for date and name here. So we'll make these dynamic values. And we're going to export these because we're going to get the real values of them inside app. So let's export them out of event. And we'll just hard code some values right now. The next thing we're going to do is add our own data array so that we can then pipe that into each component here. So let's add another file called historydata.js. And what I did was I went to a website and scraped this data and then just kind of shaped it into a very basic array of objects. So we'll have some historical events. So each historical event is represented by one object. And I kept it real simple. Each object has a name and a date property. Let's go ahead and export this array and then import it into app. Then we'll use this array to loop over. So we'll use a Svelte each loop. So now we need to get the real values. So let's go ahead and destructure our event object. So we'll destructure it with name and date. Let's go ahead and resolve these class issues. So our timeline should actually look like this, where we have one event on the left side and one event on the right side. And the way we're going to do that is head over to the event component. And we've got a couple classes here, left and right. And so we'll remove this left class and instead use some Svelte class shorthand, and we'll add the left class only when this condition is true. And so what we'll do up here is we'll create a variable called isLeft, and we'll set that to true. And so we'll add the class left when isLeft is true. Okay, now we want to employ the right class, and we'll add the right class when isLeft is false. So now if I make it false here, then everything flips over to the right side. If I make it true, then it flips back over to the left side. We'll export this, and inside app, we'll go into the event component, and we'll set the isLeft property. What we'll do is we'll add the index counter here, and we'll say when an element is even, it will be on the left side, and when it's odd, it'll be on the right side. And then you can see our components now take the left and right positions. Let's just go ahead and adjust the CSS to this left side component. Good, and so this is how we can take our own array of objects that represent historical data and pipe it in to an each loop and then have it all rendered here. So now let's shift this and get our data from someone else's database. And in this case, we can use an API to do that. Now I went out and looked for historical events APIs and didn't have much luck, but I did find this one holiday API, which will serve its purpose. And so it's a free API. Head there, just sign up, and then they'll go ahead and give you an API key that you can include in the endpoint. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put our API in its own doc so that we don't mix it with the app. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new doc here, and I'll call it holidaysapi.js. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and get the API endpoint. And so I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste the whole thing here. Now, this is the endpoint that I got from my account, but what I did was I abstracted out I put the key in its own variable as well as the country and the language. So, for example, if I want to take the holidays and instead of seeing them in English, see them in Spanish, it would be much easier for me to just change this here. So this is what I got from the holidays API website, and you go ahead and do the same. And then once you have that, we're going to go ahead and set up a little helper function here. Okay, now let's head to the try part of this function. So what we're going to do, what we want to start off with is just going to fetch and go to this API URL with the key and the language and the country signified there. But what we're going to do is, because this is an async function, the promise that is returned, we're going to await that and store it in a variable that we'll just call predictably response. And then what we want to say after that is if response.ok, then we want to basically take this response and turn it into JSON. But again, we're going to have to await that. since we're inside an asynchronous function. And when the JSON does come back, we'll go ahead and store that in a variable that we'll just call JSON response. And then we'll return JSON response. But before we do that, let's just console log what it is. Okay, so we've made this helper function called getData. So let's go ahead and export that so that we can use this inside of our app component. And what we're going to do is when the app component mounts, that's when we want to call this getData function immediately. So I'm just going to go ahead and import Svelte's lifecycle on mount function there. And so you can see in the console log, this is what we get back. So after the component mount, it went ahead and called getData. And you can see we've got a few different properties here. The one we're interested in is this holidays property, which is an array of 149 objects. And so the holidays property is what we want to, let's go ahead and console log JSON response.holidays. And once we do that, we just get the array back. So that's perfect. That's what we want. We'll go ahead and make a variable here called events, which will be an array. And we basically want to take events and assign it to whatever comes back from getData. So now what we're seeing over here is the holidays API console log here. But let me go ahead and comment this out, and I'll return JSON response.holidays, which will be the array. And now we'll just do a reactive console log with events here. Now you can see with the onMount, we're calling the getData and storing the array inside of events. But what we see in the console log is a promise that's unresolved. And so the way we resolve this promise is also to take this anonymous function inside onMount and make it asynchronous. And then we'll await with getData. And then what comes back now is actually the holidays array, and we will store that inside of events. So now events is a real array instead of a promise, which will be an object. And if you try to do an each loop with a promise, it'll say, hey, we're looking for something that's iterable. What we'll do is we'll take events and we'll take our previous history data array, which we're looping over here, and we'll replace hist events with events. So now this is coming from the holidays API, and you can see immediately the event names change. Now we got New Year's Day, Epiphany, Chinese New Year's, Groundhog's Day. Now, the one thing that is immediately noticeable is that the date is not how I want it to look. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to format the date by adding a function here called convertDate. And what we want to do is let's just, we'll call this a new date. And we'll literally make it instantiation of the date object. And let's just console log that to see what it is. And so where we're going to call this is on our loop. So our date prop will equal convertDate with date as the argument. And so when we console log, this is now what comes back. So before we just had this small part, but now that we have instantiated a date object, this is what's coming back. And now we can go ahead and work with this to change it into something a little bit more human readable. And we'll use a method called toLocalDateString. And for the second parameter here, it'll take an object. And so you can see what comes back looks a bit more human readable. So now we've taken this date string and formatted it to look like this now. Now, the one thing I notice is that New Year's Day is on December 31st, so we're actually 1 day behind. And the reason that is that we have to include the time zone here. If you find that your dates are 1 day behind, then go ahead and indicate inside your date object the time zone. And so we've got all of our holidays data showing correctly with the right dates, and you can see there's just a lot of info here. So I think what I'm going to do is also add a search input at the top here so that we could search by, for example, the date or by the event name. So I'm going to head back over to W3 Schools and just go ahead and get a simple search input. So how-to section, search button, and this looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and use this. So we'll copy this over. So the first thing we want to do on our search form is we'll go ahead and import it into our app. And then I'll add a little bit of extra HTML here. We'll create a header. Okay, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bind the values in our form. So we've got this input, and we'll go ahead and make a value attribute, but we'll bind that value attribute to search term. Create that up here. Export it up to app. And inside the search form component, let's go ahead and bind to that. And we'll do a reactive console log for search term. Good, so that's working. Then the next thing we want to do is after we type something in the form, we want to click this button. We'll go ahead and do an on submit on the form, and we'll use a modifier to prevent default. And then we'll forward this event up to app. And inside of our search form, we'll do on submit, and we'll actually call an event handler, which we'll call get results. And so the idea behind this is that we want to be able to type in the name of one of these holidays. Let's just say we type in New Year's here. And then when we click search, what we're going to need to do is search the holidays array that is brought in from the API. So let's go ahead and create a loop for that. And we want to start off by saying if EVD, if the event that comes in includes anything in the search term, that means anything in this input, then what we want to do is we want to scroll the screen down to that event. So let's go ahead and make another function that we'll call move-into-view. And we'll go ahead and say move into view this element, meaning this HTML element. And what I want to do is good old-fashioned JavaScript DOM API. So we'll just do document.getElement by ID. And the ID I'm going to give to each of these is going to be based on the name. So let's go ahead and go back to our event. And let's go ahead and give each outer div container an ID attribute. And the prop will be called event ID. And so up here we'll export let event ID, and then inside app, we now need to pass that prop in our loop. So event ID will be the name. That means the name property that's coming back from the API. So basically the ID for this one will be New Year's Day. So now let's just go ahead and check that. So here's the div, and it has an ID of New Year's Day. And then here's the next div, and it has an ID of 7th day of Kwanzaa. So good. So when we call MoveIntoView, we're going to select this HTML element by its ID. Then we're going to use a JS method called scrollIntoView. So when are we going to call MoveIntoView? So that's right after we call getResults. So we type something in here, we click the button, and clicking the button will call getResults. It'll search through the holiday API array to see if what we typed in here matches anything in that. And if it does include something, then we're going to go ahead and return MoveIntoView. But now we have to call MoveIntoView with an argument here. And so the element that we want to put in here is event.name. Okay, and so I'm getting an error here. Event.includes is not a function, and so the reason is I'm not drilling down enough, so it should be event.name. So if event.name includes the search term, so now let's try that. So if I do groundhog, so then you can see it automatically scrolled down to here. Now it was really quick. Let's go ahead and try New Year's. If I do that, it comes up to here. Now it's not very smooth, so let's go ahead and use one of scrollIntoView's parameters. So now if I type in Groundhog's Day, then it'll do a smooth scroll to that event. So if I try New Year's, it'll smooth scroll back up to it. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is we need to refine our input, because right now we have to literally type in something that is rather accurate to this. Let's give the user a little bit more freedom to type lowercase and maybe even just sections or parts of words, and it'll still go there. So that means we need to work on our getResults event handler. And so we'll replace evt.name with lower name. But let's go also towards allowing people to type in the names of the months or the dates. So like if I want to look at all the holidays in April, right now it won't go there because we're not focusing on the date, we're only focusing on the name. So let's also create lower date. Now the same thing we did down here with the event date prop where we use this convert date, let's do the exact same thing. But instead of date this, we'll do evt.date. And we'll make that too lowercase. If lower name dot includes search term or lower date includes search term, then go ahead and move into view that particular element. Now let's go ahead and try April. And then it'll move me down to April. Let's try December. We won't even finish December. We'll just say Decem. And it'll take me down there. I can go ahead and type in, let's see, Kwanzaa. Take me up to Kwanzaa. Good. So that works great. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is go ahead and clear out this input after I've hit search. And we'll just take search term here and assign it to an empty string. And we'll do that after 1 second. So now if I type in April, and then it clears out automatically. Now let's deal with a time when I type something that isn't there. Like let's just try that. See, nothing's there, so it's not actually moving into view anything because the API doesn't match this term. So let's handle that. And why don't we create another function that we'll call no results. And what we'll do, instead of having some kind of modal come in, we'll just replace the text here with no results. And then let's also clear it out after a second. So if we do get some results, go ahead and move the element into view, as well as clear out the input. If I don't get any results, then go ahead and call the function no results, which will put no results in here. So let's just try hey. So it says no results, and then it clears it out. And so now I can go ahead and type in months. I can type in dates. I can type in, let's say, St. Patrick's Day. I can't remember when that is, so I'll type in just part of the word, and then we get St. Patrick's Day. And this is how you can make a timeline using your own data or data that you fetch from another API, as well as a search input to search through that data, all using Svelte.